According to the clock on the wall, it's 5 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting of the James City County Wetlands Board to order. Protocol requires that I read the statement. Responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to preserve the wetlands and to accommodate economic activity so as to prevent their depopulation. Now, we have two members tonight that, due to COVID concerns, will not be physically present here. They will be participating through electronic media. The board has to vote tonight, the three of us here, the quorum here, has to vote to allow these two members to participate electronically. I would like to ask a motion, please, from the board to allow Mr. David Gussman to participate in the meeting.
So moved.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 You don't need okay, voices. At the same time, I'd like to ask a motion to allow Mr. Robert Lincolns to participate.
So moved.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Ms. Pearman, we'll move ahead with the roll call, please.
Yes, Mr. Roadley,
Here.
Mr. Apperson,
Here.
Mr. Waltrip, Mr. Gussman.
Here,
And Mr. Gussman, can you tell us where you're participating from?
7308 Church Lane, Towano.
Thank you. And Mr. Lukens? Mr. Lukens? Okay, it appears he is not here right now. Okay, well, we have enough to move forward.
Move ahead, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Any problem with the minutes? Anyone?
Nope.
And David, can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly,
just
the
can't hear
minutes
you,
are
sir. You have
look
any
fine
problem
to
with the
me.
minutes? Anybody here reply from him?
The minutes look fine to me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Very well. The minutes stand approved as read then. Moving on. Public hearings. This is something new I've got to bring up tonight too. Outlined for tonight's public hearings will be a staff presentation, followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. Then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address to be heard for the record. After all wishing to speak have done so, the public hearing will be closed and discussion among the board will start. I think the gist of this thing is that if you want to say something, folks, please say it while the public hearing is going on, because I don't know if they're going to allow the public hearing to be reopened or not anymore. This is the first I've seen it, and I think that's the way it is, and it's just reasonable to me. With that much being said, let's move along. Mr. Long, I think you're next on the agenda here. WJPA 20-0038, VMRC 20-1934, 8797 Pocahontas Trail, a living shoreline.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Trevor Long.
1 second, please.
I'd like to make a statement that so it's not a conflict of interest here that who is representing Shoreline?
Trevor is going to be doing this case tonight, sir.
That there would be no conflict of interest on any projects here that's working with me or with other.
That means you're not going to vote?
I don't think. Well, that means.
I don't know. I need to ask your attorney here. If we lose a vote, the meeting, will that case still be valid?
That's fine. You can
Okay,
still move
good.
forward.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now, everything's good. Okay, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Long.
Afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Trevor Long, here representing WJPA 20-0038 at 8797 Pocahontas Trail. The applicant request is to construct a living shoreline with breakwaters and sand backfill. Again, on property located at 8797 Pocahontas Trail, as outlined above in blue. Mr. Neville Reynolds of VHB Inc. has applied for a wetlands permit on behalf of Mr. Samuel Minkoff of Carter's Grove Associates, LLC. Again, to construct a living shoreline consisting of 12 breakwaters, beach nourishment, backshore plantings, a revetment refurbishment, and a new revetment on property located 8797 Pocahontas Trail in the Skiffs Creek watershed. as shown above. An aerial photograph of the site in question right along this shoreline here, with the James River being the body of water it accompanies. Topography as it embodies the site, steep ravines and embankments along the shoreline, and a site plan showing the entirety of the work. The shoreline is characterized by heavily eroded banks caused by offshore wave action. Height of several of the bluffs are estimated at over 50 feet, consistent with Senate Bill 776, enacted on July 1st, 2020. The applicant is proposing a living shoreline approach to protect and restore the property. The project consists of 12 freestanding offshore armored stone breakwaters, as shown above. A 78,000 cubic yards of sand fill to create 108,754 square feet of sandy intertidal shoreline and 285,595 square feet of vegetated shoreline. Plantings are Spartina patens, salt meadow hay, planted on 18-inch centers. Upstream from the plantation house is a series of 8 breakwaters, all 175 feet in length, while the downstream segment has two 206-foot, one 200-foot, and one 175-foot breakwaters. The project also includes the installation of 2 new segments of riprap revetment, 660 feet and 387 feet, and refurbishment of an older revetment for approximately 1,380 feet. Total impacts to non-vegetated intertidal wetlands equates to 108,500 square feet and 240,558 square feet of subaqueous impacts. Project also includes the installation of an open pile pier, timber pier, 8 foot wide by 832 feet long, and covered boat lift. Pier crosses non-vegetated wetlands and open water. Both the pier and boat lift are outside the Wetlands Board's jurisdiction. In addition, a failed concrete drainage channel located in the center of the existing revetment will be replaced with a pipe outfall and failing spillway from a freshwater pond adjacent to the shoreline that will be replaced with a spill box and emergency spillway. Above shows a cross-section of the breakwaters being proposed, and a more detailed drawing of the impacted areas, the revetments being shown here in green, the breakwaters here in yellow, and the sand fill behind the breakwaters here in blue. The resulting habitat, as it will be affected and that will come of this project, are outlined here in red and blue. As published in the Virginia Register on July 11th, 2005, the revised Wetland Mitigation Compensation Policy and Supplemental Guidelines, Regulation 4 VAC 20-390-10, Virginia, as a Chesapeake Bay program partner, is committed to achieve a no net loss of existing wetland acreage and function to the program partner, to the signatories' regulatory programs. In order for a proposed project to be authorized to impact wetlands and compensate for the wetland loss in some prescribed manner, the following 3 criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, must be incorporated in the proposal. Proposal must clearly be water dependent in nature. The proposal must demonstrate clearly its need to be in the wetlands and its overwhelming public and private benefits. Staff has reviewed this application and finds that this project does meet all 3 of the criteria as outlined above. Some staff photographs above show the area in question, with breakwaters being here in the water and the backfill of sand in this area. Some of the bluffs of which are eroding and of which the applicant is trying to protect. Again, the breakwaters being proposed constructed out here in the water, and a few photographs from the water looking in towards the project site. Staff has reviewed the application above and recommends approval of this application as presented. Should the board wish to approve the application, staff should suggest the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary local, state, and/or federal permits required for the project. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, Floodplain Area Regulations of the James City County Zoning Ordinance and receive all required approval and permits prior to commencement of such activities. The backshore planting area shall be planted with Spartina patents, approximately 285,600 square feet in area with 2-inch plugs on an 18-inch spacing in a triangular pattern. A surety in the amount of $20,000 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. One half of the surety will be released immediately after planting, with the remaining surety to be released once 90% of the minimum survival rate is achieved at 1 year post-planting. And that this wetlands permit for this project shall expire on January 13th, 2022 if construction is not begun, and if extensions to this project are needed, a written request shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than December 2nd, 2021, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Thank you very much for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have at this time.
Questions, sir?
Questions for staff?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Long. This time, we'd like to open the public hearing for this case. Anyone wishing to speak to this case, please come forward. And remember, we need your name and address.
My name is Neville Reynolds, 5561 Down Creek Road, Gloucester, Virginia. I'm the agent for the project. I don't have any prepared comments. I'm happy to answer any questions about the project.
I have just one. I'm just curious. Is the Spartina that you're going to plant there, is that a local, a native seed source?
Yes, it would be.
I would have a concern there that it'd be, localized seed. It would be important in the long run. That's the only question I have for you.
Neville, is all of this proposed from an access standpoint, access from the water?
Our project will be built from the water. We will be doing some land work where that deteriorated outfall is going to be replaced with a pipe, but the equipment will be brought on from a barge. The work will be done and then removed from the barge.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak, please? David, could you hear that okay? You have any questions?
No questions at this time. And I could hear it perfectly fine.
Did we ever get in touch with the other member? Mr. Wilson, do you know?
Check.
Robert. I apologize for this, folks. We'll get it straight here in a minute. Bear with us for a second.
They did not get in touch with me.
Mr. Chair,
Oh, sorry, I didn't see-
Mr.
didn't
Lukens
see
has
it back
not
there.
joined the meeting yet.
Okay. Seeing no one else wishing to speak, we'll close the public hearing and have a discussion by the board.
Mr.
I
Chairman,
have a comment.
I'm sorry, David. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I have one comment. I believe this is the most ambitious living shoreline project that I think has come before the board. And it's a very challenging situation. And I have a request. I think I'll direct it at the staff. I'm in favor of the project, and if it's approved, I would really like the staff to document how this project works out. It would be a great case study. I'd like you guys to do inspections, and when you do the inspections, take lots of photographs. But this could be a very, very interesting study. If this works out as expected, boy, it'll erase all doubts about how well living shorelines work in some tough situations. So it's a suggestion for the staff.
That comes
So
from-
noted.
Excuse me. Go ahead, sir. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So noted.
That comes from me also. You took the words out of my mouth. More pictures is better. And I'm sure it's going to work well, but this is a chance to document some history on some, a good project. That's all I have to say.
Mr. Chairman, I don't really have too many comments. Staff visited the site with some of the board members, and there's an obvious need for some type of erosion control along this reach of shoreline. Their desire to control the outflow a little bit better coming from the pond was noted and fairly obvious. So like Mr. Gussman, I have no objection to the project as proposed. I'll be voting in favor.
I also endorse the project wholeheartedly. It's a tremendously big project in terms of acreage. I really would like to see it succeed, and I know that it will. It's just, as Mr. Gussman said, this will show off how to protect the riverbanks in years to come with this project. I'm going to vote in favor. Walter, even though you're not voting, do you have anything you'd like to say?
I say it's well.
All right, we're ready to vote?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the permit for Wetlands Board case WJPA 20-0038.
You hear that, David?
Yes,
You're in agreement, ready to vote?
yes,
Okay. Go ahead, call the roll, please.
Mr. Roadley,
Yes.
Mr. Apperson,
Yes.
and Mr. Waltrip is abstaining. Mr. Gussman.
yes.
Thank you. Motion is passed, the permit is passed. Board considerations, they have anybody they want to bring up?
No, sir.
All right, moving on, we're going to do something a little bit different now. Excuse me, Mr. Wilson, yes, sir.
It didn't make it onto your board guide for tonight, but there was a presentation, end-of-year presentation by staff that will postpone till the February meeting.
Okay, thank you, sir. That's the chair of the Chesapeake Bay Board and vice chair are both not available. We're going to ask for volunteers from the board sitting here for someone to serve
Excuse me,
tonight.
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry.
We have to close the Wetlands Board meeting first.
Right, exactly. No further comments. I'd like to have a motion to close the Wetlands Board.
So moved.
So moved. Thank you. Meeting is closed.
Thank you.
Now, we don't have the chair or vice chair of the other board here, so we're going to ask for a volunteer tonight from the board here to manage the rest of for the Chesapeake Bay meetings. Do I have a volunteer?
Mr. Chairman, I volunteer.
Roadley has volunteered to be acting chair tonight for the meetings, and
I just need a voice vote, so all in favor of Mr. Roadley acting as chair, please say aye.
aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Okay, it's official.
Thank you. I'd like to call to order the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board. It is the responsibility of this board to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries to the Chesapeake Bay. We have two members that wish to participate remotely due to COVID-19 concerns, and we have a quorum physically present at this meeting tonight. Those present must vote to allow each member to participate remotely. May I have a motion to allow David Gussman to participate remotely?
Motion, Mr. Gussman, be allowed to participate remotely.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And Mr. Gussman, can you tell us where you're participating from?
7308 Church Lane, Toano, Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Gussman.
I'll try it again with Mr. Lukens. May I have a motion to allow Robert Lukens to participate remotely?
Make a motion that I would out of contact with him.
Mr. Lukens, are you on the line?
Apparently not.
Doesn't appear so. We can move forward.
Mike to get back. Interim, the outline for tonight's public hearings will be a staff presentation followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. and then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. After all wishing to speak have done so, the public hearing will be closed and discussion among the board will start.
Mr. Lukens has not joined us, so you can go forward with the roll call.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Apperson?
Here.
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Thank you.
We have the minutes from the December 9th, 2020 board meeting. Any corrections or additions? Very good. The minutes stand approved. The first case tonight, CBPA case 8797 Pocahontas Trail, drainage and associated grading. Mr. Long.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, watershed planner, here to present CBPA 20-0142 at 8797 Pocahontas Trail. Mr. Anthony Lobier of VHB has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Carter's Grove Associates, LLC, for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the regrading of a ravine, regrading of a shoreline, and the installation of outfall pipes and spillway on property located at 8797 Pocahontas Trail within the Skiffs Creek watershed. As outlined above in the vicinity map, the proposed project site within the Skiffs Creek watershed along the James River, and the approximate location of the proposed project. Topography showing on this site characterized by steep ravines leading out to the water and steep embankments. And the topography in the project area of location 1. Topography of the project location in project 2. And the resource protection area as it is defined in area 1. Total area involved with this portion of the project equals approximately 15 acres, of which 100% is located within the RPA. The application request is in conjunction with the Wetlands Permit Request, WJPA 20-0038, to protect the James River shoreline bordering this property. The applicant is proposing to regrade the shoreline and a ravine and to install outfall pipes and a spillway to an existing pond. Limits of work are proposed in 3 separate locations and is proposed to run concurrently with the shoreline stabilization projects proposed in WJPA 20-0038. There are 2 outfall pipes associated with this proposal. One outfall pipe is proposed in a degrading ravine currently transporting runoff towards the resource. Second outfall pipe is associated with an existing pond on site. Total impacts associated with the proposed project equal 5,182 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA and 240,857 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA. Total impervious impacts to the RPA associated with the installation of the pipes and spillway equal 541 square feet. There are also 22,075 square feet of steep slopes proposed to be impacted within this project. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious cover impact to the RPA equals 1 planting unit, equaling 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs. However, the entire disturbed area within the RPA must be revegetated with 3 trophic layers, canopy, understory, and shrub, per the ordinance. While no mitigation plan has been submitted at this point, the applicant has expressed intentions of planting in excess of the required mitigation plantings. The applicant must coordinate with the Virginia Department of Forestry for this restoration effort. Section 1 of the proposed project here. The area to be regraded here in blue. Steep slope impacts here in red. Section 2, again, area to be regraded in blue, and the outfall piping that was spoke of earlier, indicating here. In section plan 3 of regrading and the proposed spillway reconstruction above. Site photographs of the areas in question. Picture showing this from the top view down towards the river, the steepness of the embankments. Staff's view of this application is that it meets all 5 of the conditions presented in the ordinance. Should the board also find the exception request meet all 5 of the conditions, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for this project, specifically an erosion and sediment control plan and a land disturbance permit. A mitigation plan consisting of 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 3 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. Coordination with the Virginia Department of Forestry on revegetating the total disturbed area, buffer restoration and trees and shrubs suitable to that location. That a surety of $20,000 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee required plantings of the RPA buffer restoration, and that this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by January 13th, 2022, with written requests for an extension be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than December 2nd, 2021, just 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have at this time.
Any questions for staff?
I have none.
Mr. Gussman?
No questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant care to comment on the application?
Neville Reynolds, 5561 Down Creek Road, the agent for Mr. Menkoff and Carter's Grove Associates LLC. We're in agreement with staff recommendations, and I'm happy to answer any
Questions? Gussman?
No questions.
Just curious, are you able to use any of the bank material for fill for the beach portion?
No, in fact, just for clarification, the only bank grading that really is occurring is where the boat dock makes landfall. I think the grading that was referred to in the drawings by staff is really the sand fill that is placed in the RPA but butts up against the embankment. And then there'll be some very minor grading around the pond to install the emergency outfall and the outfall pipe, but there's no bank grading associated with the project.
So those tall banks are not going to be graded back?
No, they will not. With the exception of where the pipe is installed. That is about a 30-foot embankment there. There's a very steep head cut that's developed there was a concrete flume that was put in there back in the late 70s. It's completely come apart. So that part of the embankment will be regraded, but it will be graded as necessary to install the outfall pipe, and then in such a way as to control further down cutting, from runoff on top of the pipe.
Very good. Thank you very much. Would anybody in the audience care to speak on this application? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing. Board discussion?
Very comprehensive, I think. It's a real good project. I'm not going to vote.
Mr. Gussman?
It looks good to me.
Is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that the board vote to approve case CBPA 20-0142, 8797 Pocahontas Trail.
Motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA-20-0142.
Mr.
Roll call,
Roadley?
please.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
And Mr. Waltrip? Abstaining? And Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Thank you.
Permit is approved. Thank you. CBPA 20-0141-137 Westbury deck extension. Mr. Wilson.
Evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson here to present case CBPA 20-01-137 Westbury, John and Teresa Murphy. They are proposing a deck extension at their property in Ford's Colony. The vicinity map here shows the property outlined here, and it backs right up to one of the ponds that's within the Ford's Colony subdivision. Pond is shown here. RPA is based off of the edge of the topography of the site, sloping from the cul-de-sac at Westbury all the way down to the pond. There is a sanitary sewer out there. It runs along property, edge of the pond. RPA as it affects this property, borders of the house, existing house structures in the RPA. There's a wetland system that comes up this way and affects this part of the property as well. The project location is here. The existing deck is nestled in between these. From the site plan that was submitted, the deck is here, the lake is here, and the cul-de-sac is off at the bottom of the page. Outlined in yellow is the proposed extension of the deck. That deck extension is approximately 40 square feet of additional impervious cover. A couple photographs of the site. When the original deck was constructed, it was constructed with a 45-degree angle, and the applicants are proposing to square that off and make the deck more usable for them. All of that. And then staff's evaluated this application and the exception request for the construction of this deck extension. It feels that the exception does meet the conditions outlined in the ordinance and should be heard before the board because the deck is accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to sections 23(7) if the application meets the following 5 conditions: that the exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief, that granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. I was remiss in outlining their mitigation proposal. Look at the aerial photograph. There's this entire portion of the property is in a planting bed, and the applicants have proposed to add additional shrubs in this area that would survive those wet conditions. Staff is in agreement that the application does meet all 5 of the conditions that I outlined, and it is approvable. Should the board also find that the exception request meets all 5 of the conditions above, staff does suggest the following conditions be incorporated into that approval: that the applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. This would entail building permits. The mitigation plan consisting of 3 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. That a surety of $250 be submitted in a form acceptable to the county attorney's office to guarantee the plantings. That the exception request for approval shall become null and void if construction is not begun by January 13th, 2022, and the written request for extension should be submitted to our office no later than December 2nd, 2021. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have regarding this application.
Questions for staff? Mr. Gussman?
No questions.
I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant care to address the board?
Darrell Wall, address is 137 Sand Hill Road, Williamsburg, Virginia. I'm the agent for the homeowner, and I just wanted to add a couple items for the record for the homeowner. They're good stewards. They have hired a landscape architect, and they've already planted native plant species, and with the neighboring properties, their landscape has exceeded anything else that's out there. They have already proposed to exceed the recommendations for plantings. They've got 3 shrubs and some grasses and stuff to include in the landscape that they already have. They also are going to have a bed at the base of this deck to continue that to help contain any water runoff. In regards to the existing landscape, it is a berm and it is a dry well, and the runoff from the house is already contained in a dry well. So their impact to this pond is minimal. It is a very small addition. The reason why they're doing this is when their house was built, they had a nice wooded lot next door so they could enjoy their deck. Recently, there's a home that was built right next to them, and now their only view is of a 30-foot wall with siding. So they just want this extension so they can enjoy their property and the water view.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the applicant? Thank you. Would anyone else care to address the board on this case? Hearing none, the matter is before the board. Close the public hearing.
I plan to vote for approval.
Anything else? Mr. Gussman,
No comments.
do I have a motion?
Sir, you want to make it, or I'll make it?
I'll make a motion to,
Okay.
I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution to grant the exception to Chesapeake Bay Board.
We have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 20-0141.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes?
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
And Mr. Roadley, Mr. Lukens has just joined us. Mr. Lukens, I'm not going to have you vote on this public hearing. You can,
I agree.
okay, but I do need a motion from one of the members to allow Mr. Lukens to participate remotely.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion, we allow Mr. Lucas to attend the meeting.
Okay, and all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And Mr.
Aye.
Lukens, can you tell us where you're participating from?
Yes, I'm calling in remotely from Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Very good. Next case, CBPA 20-0140 at 244 William Barksdale, 2 retaining walls. Mr. Wilson.
Evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mike Wilson here to present KCBPA 20-0140 at 244 Williams Barksdale for Michael and Catherine Hoyt. They are proposing 2 retaining walls for a total impact to the RPA of 130 square feet. Barksdale is in the Kings Mill subdivision located here, right close to the James Colonial Parkway. Project location in the back of the property. Topography of the site, sloping from the cul-de-sac down to the ravine here at the left of the of this photograph, and the slopes are steep and eroding in this area. Floodplain as it affects close to the property but does not affect the property, outlined here in blue. RPA as it affects the property. The entire rear of the property is in the RPA. This house was platted in 1985 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance. From the site plan, they are proposing 2 retaining walls, one here, the first one in the back here, and the second one on the side of the house here, a smaller wall. And then the mitigation, they're proposing 11 shrubs below the long retaining wall at the rear of the 100-foot RPA buffer as it affects this property. Said the mitigation couple photographs from the site. Looking from the left-hand side of the property, the wetlands off to the left, you can see the steep slope nature of the property there. On the other side of the property, retaining wall in this location, mitigation plantings down here. From the house looking back towards where the retaining wall would be built. And the smaller wall up at the house in this location here. Staff evaluated his application and the exception request for the construction of these 2 retaining walls and feels that it meets the ordinance conditions in 2311 and 2314 and should be heard before the board because the retaining walls are accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to 23.7 of the code if application meets the following 5 conditions. Again, that the exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief, that granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied the chapter to others, that the exception request will be in harmony and purpose with the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance, Chapter 23 of the Code, and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed, which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view is that it does meet all 5 of those conditions as presented and is approvable. And should the board also find the exception request meets all 5 of those conditions, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into that approval. That the applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project, including James City County building permit. That a surety of $250 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office for the planting mitigation, which again is 11 shrubs. That the exception request become null and void if construction is not begun by January 13, 2022, and that written requests for extensions to the request be submitted no later than December 2nd, 2021. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have on this matter.
Questions from the board? Mr. Wilson, can you describe the conditions at the approximately at the between the house and the channelward retaining wall?
I will defer that to Mr. Roth, who is here on the applicant's behalf.
Mr. Gussman, any questions for staff? Mr.
No.
Lukens? Hearing none. I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant care to address the board?
Chairman, member Roth, President of Roth Environmental, 700 Prescott Circle, Newport News, Virginia. Here tonight on behalf of the Hoyts, 244 William Barksdale. Roughly just under a half-acre lot there in Kings Mill subdivision. Mike, could you go back to the site plan, please? What you've got between the proposed retaining wall, which is right parallels the rear property line, and College Creek, which on this is to the top of the page, there's KCSA property between the property and actual creek. What you've got is on this property, right in this area here, and it doesn't show up on the other topography very well, and this only kind of moderately shows it, but all the runoff in the rear yard is basically funneling to a point. And you've got a stump right above where it's dropping down and starting to create a head cut. And it's going to start working its way back into the yard. And so the proposal was to stop that head cut from advancing toward the house, and in doing so, being able to flatten out that rear yard to slow down a lot of the water coming off the house. This is a 1987 build, so everything was relatively small at the time. They, at least in this lot, they centered the house pretty well, as opposed to having it pushed way toward the back like we see a lot of them in Kings Mill. But with the 73-foot retaining wall across this back, we should be able to slow the water down. There's going to be gravel behind the wall, so as the water does move toward the creek, it'll be able to infiltrate into the wall. It'll come out the weep holes, and we'll have plantings down below it so that we'll be able to hopefully absorb some of that water and some of the nutrients and keep it stable down below the wall.
This is a stacked block wall?
Yes. And then the wall up near the house is basically replacing the timber wall that's up there that's failing. It seemed logical to go ahead and replace that little 15. The mitigation, we're going to do the 11 shrubs down below the wall. That seems to work pretty well, and that will stabilize the ground below the wall. We found that works very well. A little simple design, but it seemed that's usually what works.
Any other questions for the applicant?
How is that retaining wall going to be?
It's only going to be about a 4-foot wall.
Going to have still a slope?
There will still be a slope coming down the hillside, and they'll restabilize the hill and grass just like it is now.
Provisions for catching that water, and or is it going over?
It'll be gravel behind the wall, so a lot of it'll infiltrate behind the wall and just kind of go down there. It'll come out the weep holes at the bottom, anything that doesn't continue to infiltrate straight down. When we were out there, did a couple soil augers. It's a pretty sandy loam material, so it's got a pretty good chance of doing some pretty good infiltration there. Still well up above the groundwater table there down toward College Creek.
Mr. Gussman, Mr. Lukens, any questions of the applicant?
No.
No questions.
Thank you. Would anybody else care to comment on this application?
Michael Hoyt, Barksdale. I'm a homeowner here with Catherine. Just here to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for the applicant? Very good. Thank you for coming. If there are no other comments, I will close the public hearing. Board discussion.
To me, it looks like the homeowner there, or somebody's already put down some filter cloth trying to direct the water away. It's washing away. There's no question in my mind that's needed. And to vote for it.
Gussman, Mr. Lukens, any comment?
None from me.
No comment.
I have a motion.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adopt CBPA 20-0140244 Williams Barksdale's for 2 retaining walls.
We have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 20-0140.
Yes, Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Thank you very much for coming out. Next application, CBPA-20-01005520 North Mallard Run retaining wall in River Rock area. Mr. Wilson?
Chair, members of the board, again, Mike Wilson here to present case CBPA 20-0100, Mr. Emmanuel Greenspan at 5520 North Mallard Run. And Mr. Aaron Williams of Williams Landscape Design is well. He is proposing the construction of a retaining wall and then a river rock area to erosion of his property. His property is located in the Mallard Hill subdivision, which is off the main entrance into the War Hill District Park off a Long Hill Road here. If you're familiar with that, you going into the park, there's a subdivision off to the right. These are the soccer fields, complex is up here, and the county football Warner Stadium is up there. In the aerial photograph, the project location is in this general area here. Topography of the site, again, high point near the cul-de-sac up at the bottom of the page, and then deeply sloping down towards Powhatan Creek floodplain. The floodplain is shown here. It is a designated floodway. It shows up on the FEMA maps. The elevation of that floodplain is approximately 43 feet mean sea level, and is shown in this green area here. Sanitary sewers that affects the property, but not the project, shown in this location and then cutting across, going up into the War Hill Sports Complex. RPA as it affects this property. The amount of impervious cover proposed with the construction of the retaining wall in River Rock area is approximately 693 square feet. The property was built property was platted in 1991 after the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance, but prior to the 2004 revisions. There is erosion occurring on the back half of the property in this area. For that reason, that the applicant's proposing a retaining wall as shown on the site plan here. And then they're proposing to fill the area between the house and the retaining wall with river rock in order to provide further stabilization, and that is shown. Total, as I stated, the total impacts to the RPA are just less than 700 square feet at 693 square feet. And the required mitigation for this amount of impervious cover does equal 2 mitigation units, which is 2 canopy trees, 4 understory, and 6 shrubs. Mitigation plan proposed downstream of the retaining wall, similar to the last project. Staff's evaluated this application and the exception request for the construction of the retaining wall and the river rock area. The application does meet the ordinance conditions in sections 2311 and 2314 and should be heard by the board because the retaining wall and the river rock area are considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to 23.7 of the James City County Code if the application meets the following 5 conditions. Again, that the exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief, that granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23 to other property owners, that the exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 and is not a substantial detriment to water quality, that the exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming related to adjacent parcels, and that reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff does recommend, or staff does feel that it meets all 5 of those conditions and is approval. A couple site photographs of the area. This is off to the left here. That is the Powhatan Creek floodway. The retaining wall is going to be in this area, and then this area would be. And the retaining wall is in the back of the house here. This would be part of the area that would be proposed to be river rocked. Staff does recommend finds that this case is approvable, and should the board find that the exception request meet all 5 of the conditions previously mentioned, that the following conditions be incorporated into that approval. All other necessary local, state, and federal permits be obtained. Again, this does require a James City County building permit. To date, they have applied for one. There are outstanding comments related to floodplain elevation location. The retaining wall, number 2, the retaining wall may not be built within the Powhatan Creek floodway as shown. That a surety of $1,000 being paid and in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office. That the exception request become null and void if construction is not begun by January 13, 2022, and that written request for extension be submitted no later than December 2nd, 2021. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have application.
Mr. Wilson, stop right there. Back up. So those are the pilings supporting the deck in the back?
Correct.
The approximate location of the retaining wall relative to the pilings?
Just off the photograph.
Is that a cantilever deck?
I can't remember. I will let.
You mentioned in your recommendations that it be relocated outside of the floodway, the retaining wall?
Yes, sir. One of the issues that our building permit and safety division is having is that the site plan that was submitted did not show any topography. From the FEMA map, floodplain elevation is just less than 43, and these are 2-foot contour intervals. So the floodplain elevation is roughly halfway between 42 and 44. Here, again, roughly shown there in green. So the deck is here. Those trees we were looking at in that one photograph are here. And that retaining wall is going to be house side of those beech trees. If I have that wrong, Mr. Williams will let me know.
Very good. Any other questions from staff? Mr. Lukens and Mr. Gussman?
No questions.
Questions here, Bob Lukens. I guess looking at the, for clarification for me, the FEMA map area there showing the floodplain, does that represent a specific percentage of annual inundation?
Yeah, the blue area is the 1% annual rainfall event chance, or otherwise known as the 100-year flood. The green area, I believe, is the 500-year flood elevation. and that's why you see it going up to elevation 44. I cannot explain why the back third of this property does not show up in blue, but I can assure you it is also in the floodplain.
All right. Another question, the use of the river rock there, that will basically be a surface spread of a couple inches, basically to slow down water flow ahead of the retaining wall.
Yes, to slow down water, to allow it to infiltrate, and more importantly, to stop erosion that the applicant is currently experiencing. This stabilization technique, the backyard is rather densely canopied. It's hard to tell at this time of year how much sunlight it gets in the summertime to grow healthy grass. But my suggestion to the board is it's not a lot of sunlight reaching the backyard in the summertime. That's why they're having difficulties getting grass to establish.
Very good. Any other questions of staff? I'd like to open the public hearing for comments. Anyone wish to address the board?
Hi, my name is Aaron Williams. Can I take this off? Okay, thanks. Aaron Williams, representing Mr. Greenspan. I'm with Williams Landscaping. Yeah, Mike explained pretty much everything that I would have said, but I can answer any further questions.
I just noticed on your drawings that the location of the retaining wall in the vicinity of the deck appeared to be less than 5 feet off of the edge of the deck. So that appeared to be closer to those pilings unless the deck's cantilevered.
Yeah, it is cantilevered, yeah.
Okay.
So our objective was to stay inside of or right at the footprint of the deck above, so that we don't go any further than already has been, disturbed, but far enough away from the pilings so that we can put our, what they call geogrid in, which helps stabilize the wall.
Excellent. Very good. Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Gussman, Mr. Lukens?
No questions.
No questions.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to close the public hearing. Board discussion.
Like everything so far tonight is well engineered, needed, good design. I plan on voting for it.
Any other comments? Do I have a motion?
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we vote to adopt CBPA 20-01005520 North Mallard Run.
We have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 20-0100.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Moving on to the next case, CBPA 20-0139-289 Mill Stream Way. Mr. Wilson.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. This is the last public hearing for the night. This case CBPA 20-0139, Kevin and Tammy Potter at 289 Mill Stream Way. This applicant came before the board at the November 2020 meeting. The board denied that specific application. They have reworked their plan with Mr. Williams, and that is the plan. The revised plan is what is before the board tonight. Application again is for the construction of a patio, 2 retaining walls, step with landing, and also a deck. The property located in Millstream subdivision, or located right here. And Hickory Signpost Road is right behind this property. Project location shown here. Topography as it affects this property. Again, sloping from the street towards the rear of the property. If you remember, there is a live stream on the property at the rear. It's an RPA on the entire property. Parcel was platted in 1995 prior to the 2004 revisions, which is where this RPA is derived from. The amount of impervious cover that the Potters are now proposing is slightly less than 500 square feet at 492 square feet. In June of 2020, the applicants obtained an administrative exception to convert a deck into a house addition. A separate application was later submitted for the construction of a patio, 3 retaining walls, deck, and steps with landings. This application was deferred at the October 14, 2020 meeting to allow the applicant to adjust some things to the plan. Application was then heard at the November 11th, 2020 meeting where it was subsequently denied. The applicants have now amended that site plan as stated to reduce the impervious cover impacts to the RPA. The proposal now includes the construction of a patio, 2 retaining walls, a deck, and steps, equaling approximately 492 square feet. The plan denied at the November meeting equaled approximately 830 square feet of impacts to the RPA. They have reduced it by roughly 1/3 of what they had proposed previously. From the November plan, this is what the proposal was. Driveways here, there were steps and landings to get to a patio here, and then more steps and landings to get down to a lower level patio that was underneath a deck, which is shown here. Retaining wall here, and there were several retaining walls with the construction of the steps to help get down that slope. And then there was a long serpentine wall in this location. Wanted to go through all of that for the benefit of those board members who weren't at the November meeting. And the stream was located roughly in that location. New site plan, same basic concept. Steps coming down to a much smaller landing here. More steps down to the lower level landing here. This patio has been scaled back closer to the house and now is in this area is completely under the proposed deck. And then want to just point out to the board that in this location here, there is a sliding glass door of the basement to allow for egress from the basement. While they have kept the serpentine shape of the rear yard, they're not proposing to fill it anymore. Like the November meeting, they have taken out that serpentine wall. Retaining wall in this location, and then there's some walls here associated with the steps and these landings. The mitigation plan that was submitted, they are only required to have 1 planting unit, and they are proposing roughly 5 planting units, equivalent material, including some material over here. You can see the a lot of shrubs and perennial grasses and understory trees in this location. Plus, I just want to remind the board that everything in the front yard is also in the RPA, and they are proposing some additional driveway. Couple site photographs. At staff's request, we had Mr. Williams go out and mark on the ground the location of the seawardmost location of the improvements, and you can see them here in the orange spray paint. Corner would be corner of landing here or patio here. Steps will be coming down here. There's a small landing here. This retaining wall is one of the ones that is in this approval. They went ahead and constructed it to allow for the heat pump units to be installed. The board has issues with that. That was a staff directive, and not necessarily the applicant's violation. Again, spray paint markings showing the seaward limit of this area. Steps will be coming down here, landing, more steps, and then you can see the new footers for the from the old deck where the house extension was. The new deck would be in this area. I don't remember the exact width of the old deck, or I'm sorry, the proposed new deck. Mr. Williams. From the top of the driveway, looking down, here are the heat pump units that had to be installed. Retaining wall. Steps would be going in this area here, and then this area off to the left. That would be, there's existing wood terrace boxes. Those would be removed, and that would be. They have stabilized with sod the entire backyard here. You can see roughly that's where the old serpentine wall was. They've now mulched that area. Some of that excess fill that was back there. The proposed deck is in this area here, and then it's going to have pavers under that, and then you can't quite see it, but the sliding glass doors are just to the left of this post here. Not looking back the other way. Not looking down where the old serpentine wall was across the rear of the backyard. Staff has evaluated this application and the exception request for this proposed construction of the patio, 2 retaining walls, decks and steps with paver landings. Feels that this does meet the ordinance conditions in sections 2311 and 2314 and should be heard by the board because those items are considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to 23.7 of the ordinance if the application does meet the following 5 conditions. That the exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief, that granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied to other property owners similarly situated. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of the ordinance and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. That the exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed, which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff's view of this application is that it does meet all 5 of those conditions. The applicant has done significant job in staff's opinion of minimizing the impacts to the RPA, and we do find that is approvable. Should the board find that it meets all 5 of the conditions above, staff does suggest the following conditions be incorporated into that approval: that the applicant obtain any other necessary federal, state, local permits as required. This does include an erosion sediment control plan, land disturbing permit, and building permits as necessary for the this proposal. That the turf love program be implemented on the property. That the up to 250 square feet of the project of the pavers be permeable paver design, and it should meet the design specification number 7 of the current Department of Environmental Quality Stormwater Design specifications. That a surety of $500 be paid and in place prior to the commencement of work to guarantee the required mitigation plantings. That the exception requests become null and void if construction is not begun by January 13, 2022, and written requests for extension be submitted to our office no later than December 2nd, 2021. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have on this application.
Questions for staff? Mr. Lukens, Mr. Gussman?
No questions.
And no questions.
I'd like to say I'm glad you approved the locations of the heat pump, but I would like to say I'm glad you did that. The pads and everything, good.
Thank
Good.
you.
Yeah.
I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to care to address the board?
Thank you. Again, Aaron Williams with Williams Landscape and Design here representing Kevin and Tammy Potter. So everything Mike said follows what I would tell you. The only couple of quick things is the area in red, just so you guys, because the pictures don't really show it on that little drawing there, that's actually the house extension that was approved.
Yep.
So whatever's under that, it's already under roof. And then, so the only additional decking would be that smaller rectangle. And the question, I think, was how big is that? And I believe it's wide, and I think it was like, the only other thing is the homeowners previously had a solid concrete walkway coming from the driveway down below in the past, and that had to be removed for that construction project. Walkway, kind of thinking of it in those terms, this is a much better walkway because it's not solid concrete. It's taking the retaining wall out once we were able to kind of stabilize, because we had to get it under control. It was just raw dirt sitting out there, but it has held in well. We put erosion netting.
Very good. I appreciate the attention to detail there. We were previously concerned with the extent to which the wall encroached towards the resource itself. I think that drawing may, I think the stream's a little closer to the rear property, the toe slope, I should say. Appreciate the effort there to help minimize that impact. Any questions for the applicant? Hearing none, thank you very much. Seeing that no one else is in the audience, I will close the public hearing. Board discussion.
I recommend we adopt.
Mr. Gussman, Mr. Lukens, any comments?
No comments on my part.
I have a comment. This is a much better project. And I'm really happy to see that the applicant got the slope stabilized. Thank you for doing that. this project looks much better than the previous project, and I like the plantings plan, looks really good too. So I think I can live with this plan.
Thank you, Mr. Gussman. Do we have a motion?
Make a motion that we adopt a resolution to grant the exception to Chesapeake Bay case CBP 20.
We have a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 20-0139.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank
you very much. Board considerations, Mr. Wilson, CBPA 19-0141 2552 William Tankard Drive.
Sir, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mr. Rob Fetter is requesting a one-year extension to case CBPA 19-0141, originally granted January 20th, 2020. The request will provide him more time to evaluate his project and to explore other options to fulfill the permit requirements. Just briefly, the project was a shed in the RPA and it also potentially affecting the floodplain of Powhatan Creek. Staff does concur with the request with the stipulation that all permit conditions meet the expiration date, except the expiration date be reauthorized and the new date of expiration be January 13, 2022.
Questions for staff? Can I have a motion?
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we move for deferral 522 William Tankard Drive, CBPA 19-0141, in accordance with Mr. Wilson's.
We have a motion to adopt the resolution to extend the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA 19-0141.
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Apperson?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, any matters of special privilege?
I do have a end-of-year report that will postpone to the February meeting. We will have a February Chesapeake Bay Board meeting. We did not have any applications in time for a Wetlands Board meeting. So we will see you February 10th, 2021.
Very good. Motion to adjourn? We are adjourned.